Hello and welcome to 60 Minutes. Tonight we'll be discussing Indigenous education. Little do people know, 19.3% of Indigenous Australians live below the poverty line, compared with 12.4% of other Australians. But why? Recently, Dick Eston, representative of the Aboriginal Employment Strategy, stated that we all know there's a huge dropout rate on Aboriginal kids going into high school. Not so much in Year 7, but in Year 8 and Year 9, we've got kids in Year 10 going into banks, coming home driving motor cars with hundreds of bucks a week or whatever it is in their pockets. It's going to have a huge impact on those kids in Year 8 and Year 9. A lot of people responded to Dick with, "Dick, you're going to destroy your reputation. Aboriginal people are lazy and they won't work. You'll never win this one." So, why are we providing support to people who are unprepared to work, are lazy, lack ambition, and spend too much time on the wrong things? There are taxpayers in society who work hard and are educated and deserve the money they earn. So why are we the ones supporting people who sit on their couch and drink alcohol, have too many kids who they can't support, and don't strive to be educated?
Good evening and welcome to ABC News. In recent debates about Indigenous education, the government have taken a punitive approach to the lack of attendance to educational institutions in Indigenous communities, stating that the job-seeking parents will lose part of their welfare payment if their children are lacking school attendance. Here with me is Warren Mundine, the Chief Advisor for Indigenous Affairs, saying cutting welfare based on school attendance is too harsh.
It's a no-brainer for me. Look, if we're going to give opportunities for the kids, their future life and their careers are being able to compete for jobs and everything, as well as maintaining their culture and building a better future for their communities, then they have to be educated and be a skilled bunch of kids.
Interesting. How do you propose this issue should be addressed, Warren?
I'm on public record not supporting punitive measures. I think we need to work with parents and we need to be able to work with communities because we are making a massive cultural change here. I'm talking about that the communities where we're working didn't have this thing about going to school and what school was about. We need to get communities to get ownership, and I think by having the school attendance officers from the community, respected people from the community, and their supervisors are from the community, that sends a clear message that this is a community project and this is what the community expects. If we get a clan leader saying the same thing, that's where the big change is going to go. Now I know that governments and that punitive measures need to happen, but I think they're really a last resort.
Thank you, Warren. Now I'd like to introduce Samantha Smith from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, who will be discussing current figures relating to Indigenous poverty and the potential causes of Indigenous poverty. So, Mrs. Smith, can you provide some relevant data and the impacts and experiences of poverty for Indigenous Australians?
An Indigenous Australian is a person of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent, an identification and accepted as such by the community with which they live. Indigenous Australians make up 2.5% of the Australian population. Due to the higher fertility and mortality rates, along with shorter life expectancy, the median age for Indigenous Australians is lower than that of non-Indigenous Australians, with an age of 20 years and 37 years accordingly. Poverty for this particular group is evident when analysing the life expectancy gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Data between 2005 and 2007 displayed a life expectancy of 67.2 years for Indigenous males and 72.9 years for Indigenous females, while it sits at 78.7 years for non-Indigenous males and 82.6 years for non-Indigenous females. Evidently, there is roughly a 10-year difference between these population groups. Indigenous Australians experience a poorer standard of living than non-Indigenous Australians due to a range of interrelated factors, including access to education and healthcare, unemployment, addiction to drugs or alcohol, location of housing, like rural versus urban, or housing conditions, along with access to adequate amounts of nutritious food. So it is clear that Indigenous Australians experience the impacts of poverty in various ways. In relation to health, before a child is born, there is a risk of developing fetal alcohol syndrome when the mother consumes alcohol during pregnancy. Alcohol consumption in occasional social situations is fine, but in excess, we know, can lead to diseases such as liver disease, pancreatitis, along with potentially eliciting injury or violence. As children progress through life, they face factors such as low immunisation levels within Indigenous communities, poor nutrition in terms of malnutrition, or on the other end of the scale, obesity, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, osteoporosis, and tooth decay. Obesity due to the lack of physical activity is also an issue in Indigenous communities. The 2001 National Drug Strategy Household Survey also brought about the issue of illicit drugs and non-medical uses of prescribed drugs over 14-year-olds in Indigenous communities, at a rate of 54% in Indigenous communities compared to 37% in non-Indigenous, who claimed to having tried at least one illicit drug. A massive factor of poverty in these communities, however, is a lack of safe and affordable housing. Housing in Indigenous communities is largely poorly maintained, lacks functional infrastructure, is prone to overcrowding. There is often a large number of dogs living within the households, and quite often health risks around water, electricity, sewage, and waste disposal. This poor quality housing poses physical and mental health risks, including depression, respiratory issues, rapid spread of disease, just to name a few. In terms of morbidity, it is evident there are higher rates of disease and ill health, along with higher mortality rates than non-Indigenous Australians. Indigenous people also suffer from reduced quality of life due to ill health experiences and the higher burden of disease and injury.
Thanks, Samantha. I guess this is quite relevant to other recent news reports, which revealed the impacts and experiences of poverty on Indigenous people in the following way. First of all, I'd like to talk about employment.
Yeah, that's a massive factor.
Many Indigenous communities are located in remote rural areas, which means that there's less job opportunities and less high-paying jobs. Therefore, they have to survive on welfare, and often not having enough money can lead to crime, broken families, and often sexual assault. Mobility is another major issue that Indigenous Australians experience. Many of them can't afford petrol, therefore they can't afford to maintain their cars. And if they can't travel long distances, this means that they can't get to their jobs, they can't get to food, they can't get to hospitals and supermarkets.
So that's obviously a total contradiction to what Joe Hockey recently said.
Yes, exactly, because he believed that
Poor people don't drive cars.
Disadvantaged people don't drive cars, whereas they're actually more in need of a car because they need to travel long distances, seeing as they live in remote areas. Also, another massive issue that Indigenous Australians experience is that of prejudice. Aboriginals are more inclined to have a feeling of not belonging, which can lead to depression, fear, anger. The Indigenous communities can't afford simple luxuries of life, such as travel, holidays, day trips, visiting faraway family and friends, clothing, so on and so forth. That leads to them experiencing a poor standard of living, leading to community breakdowns, family breakdowns, violence, self-harm and depression. So these findings are very alarming, and here to speak with us about a social security payment that aids Indigenous people is Lucy Watkins, a representative from Centrelink. I'll use that instead.
Firstly, I believe it is important to be aware of the educational and employment statistics concerning Indigenous Australians. The proportion of Indigenous Australians aged 20 to 64 either studying for or holding a non-school qualification higher than Year 12 increased from 35.2% in 2006 to 40.8% in 2011. Although figures have improved, these figures are fairly below the quantity of non-Indigenous Australians who are either studying for or holding a non-school qualification, 64.6%. Without access to education, participation rates are more likely to decrease and employment rates are more likely to increase amongst Indigenous Australians. The risk of poverty for these communities is highly likely to escalate. In 2011, the unemployment rate for Indigenous Australians was 16.3%, compared with 4.9% of Australia as a whole. In order to increase access to education, and therefore hopefully decrease the experiences of poverty amongst Indigenous communities, the Australian government has implemented a social welfare payment within the Australian income security system known as ABStudy.
And what exactly is ABStudy, Lucy?
ABStudy is a social welfare payment for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are seeking assistance in relation to the costs of their chosen studies or Australian apprenticeship.
So, who is eligible to receive AB study?
To be eligible for this payment, an individual must be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, be able to meet residence requirements, living in Australia and hold an Australian citizenship, enrolled in approved education course, and not be receiving any other government assistance to study or undertake an apprenticeship or traineeship.
And what does AB study cover?
AB study covers costs in relation to education, accommodation, living, travel fares for each term or semester. However, this only applies to those who are studying away from home, and prescription medicine. They may be entitled to other payments and benefits. For example, these payments may be received in addition to or instead of AB study.
And what are the payment rates?
Now, payments received through AB study are dependent on whether you are reliant on your parents or guardians, whether your study load is full-time or part-time, whether you must live away from home due to the demands of the course being undertaken, the course being studied, your age, and how much you and your partner or your parents or guardians earn, or the number of assets your family own. Income and assets tests may be used to estimate the amount of AB study one may receive.
Interesting. Does AB study assist in reducing poverty?
According to the reference group, income support payments and associated services are intended to help people meet daily living costs, increase participation in work and social activities, and build individual and family functioning. AB study supports these intentions as it provides Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with the financial assistance required in order to complete one's chosen area of study or traineeship. This in turn benefits the individual as their increasing participation within society is likely to lessen the experience of social exclusion as well as increase employment opportunities due to higher educational attainment, therefore further reducing the risk of poverty one may face in the future. Indigenous Australians as a whole are challenged with poorer lifestyle outcomes in comparison to non-Indigenous Australians. In particular, they are confronted with issues of unemployment. According to the reference group, in 2011, there were estimated to be more than 200,000 Indigenous people in the labour force. The working age, 15 to 64 years, participation rate for Indigenous people in 2011 was estimated to be 58%, compared with the participation rate of 76% for working age Australians as a whole. If an individual is eligible to receive AB study, their chances of entering employment heightens as they are able to further their skills and knowledge in a specific field, which in turn may decrease the risk of poverty for themselves as well as their families. Education, although regarded as highly important and essential for all individuals, comes with a price. The cost of education, in particular for children from low-income earning families, can cause greater hardships, increasing the risk of deeper poverty. Therefore, AB study may assist in decreasing the poverty a family may be experiencing by providing additional assistance in relation to handling educational finances. Importantly, AB study covers more than just educational fees. Accommodation, living, travel fares and health are also covered, assisting individuals with the financial burdens in more than one area.
So there seems to be a lot of benefits from AB study, but is there any issues which hinder access to AB study?
Not all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are eligible to receive AB study, as all eligibility requirements must be truthfully met. To assess eligibility, individuals must also meet the requirements of an income and assets test, shares, property and money in the bank, as only those who are most in need are benefited with this payment. If an individual is involved in part-time work and receives over $415 per fortnight, the AB study payment decreases unless your income bank is in credit. However, this may cause further financial difficulties. These factors are influential in one's opportunity to receive AB study. If requirements are not solidly met, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, depending on the circumstances and pressures they are already challenged with, may be placed at higher risk of poverty. And finally, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has collated data concerning the percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders aged between 15 and 64 who have completed school to Year 12 in 2008. In comparison to non-Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders appear to have had significantly lower Year 12 completion percentages at all ages throughout the year 2008. AB study aims to increase these figures as well as reduce poverty and provide stepping stones towards employment, financial independence and cultural participation.